Here's Joel Richardson, author of the new book, The Mideast Beast.
Hi, I'm Joel Richardson, and I'd like to discuss for the next few minutes the idea of replacement theology. Now, replacement theology, in a nutshell, is the idea that the church has replaced Israel throughout the Old Testament. And for those that are careful students of the Scriptures, careful interpreters, know well that those that hold to replacement theology really do hermeneutical violence to dozens upon dozens, if not hundreds of passages throughout the Old Testament. So in looking at these various passages that speak of the nation of Israel and the people of Israel, and essentially the Lord's love letters to His people Israel, the church simply inserts themselves into these passages and tries to retroactively reinterpret them and take all of the promises of blessings and all of the Lord's promises of provision and applying them to the modern-day Christian church. Now, while most conservative, premillennialist, or futurist interpreters of Scripture recognize replacement theology as really being a perversion of a proper understanding of the Scriptures, in fact, many conservative, evangelical, futurist premillennialists commit this very same error, not with regard to Israel, but with regard to Israel's enemies. And so this might sound like a new idea, but I want to look at a prophecy from Numbers 24, and of course we could look at dozens of prophecies, but I want to show how we actually quite often commit the same error that many of those that we criticize for trying to replace Israel to mean something other than what it really means, to essentially allegorize or spiritualize Israel to mean something other than what its clear context means. I want to look at Numbers 24 to explain this problem. So this is Numbers 24, verse 17, and then verses 17 through 20. And this is the prophecy of Balaam and Balak. Now, Israel had come up out of Egypt. They'd been wandering in the Promised Land for roughly 39 years. And Balak was the king of Moab. And he was paying Balaam, who was a prophet, to essentially curse the Hebrew peoples. And so this is the backdrop for this passage. King Balak wants this prophet to curse the Hebrew peoples. They're standing on this great overlook, looking down at the Hebrew peoples. And instead of cursing the Hebrews, this is what Balaam says. He looks at Balak and he says, "Come, I will advise you what this people," that's the Hebrew people, "will do to your people in the last days." And that specific phrase in the Hebrew, akariyeth yom, in the most literal sense, is always a reference to the end times. It can reference the latter days, but its ultimate truest sense is the last days. And then he begins to make one of the clearest messianic prophecies in all of the Old Testament, often overlooked, but a powerful messianic prophecy. And this is what Balaam says. He says, "I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will rise up out of Jacob. The scepter will rise up out of Israel." And then what does this ruler, this scepter, this Messiah rising up out of Israel, what does he do? What does the Spirit inspire Balaam to speak? And he says this, "He will batter the brow of Moab. He will destroy all the sons of Sheth, or the sons of tumult. Edom shall be a possession. Mount Seir, which was a prominent mountain within Edom, will become his possession." So the Messiah will destroy Edom and Moab, Mount Seir, that these peoples will become a possession of the Messiah. And while Israel will do valiantly, out of Jacob one shall have dominion, and he will destroy the remnants of the peoples of that city. Then Balaam looks on Amalek, and this is another group of people that lived slightly north of Moab and Edom. These were the peoples that lived in modern-day Jordan, extending all the way down into northwest Saudi Arabia. Now he's turning his attention to Amalek, that were a bit more in the north and spread out throughout that greater region. And he says, he took up his discourse against Amalek, and he says, "Amalek was the first among the nations, but its end will be in utter destruction." So in the context of this very clear messianic prophecy, we have references to Moab, Edom, Amalek, Mount Seir, the peoples that live today to the east of Israel. In ancient times, they lived to the east, the desert peoples that lived to the east of Israel. And today, these are the regions where the Muslim majority peoples of Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Ishmaelites, so to speak, dwell throughout these regions. But see, here's what we do. Here's what many people do, is we look to these prophecies, and while casting aspersions on those that replace Israel or allegorize Israel throughout the Scriptures and saying this is poor hermeneutics, many times, many conservative interpreters look at passages such as this and we say, well, this is not a reference to modern-day Jordan or to the modern-day Eastern peoples. These are simply vague references to any end-time enemy of God's people. And we really allegorize these many, many names found throughout the Scriptures into oblivion. And again, we could look at dozens upon dozens of very similar passages where the prophets name names, where they point to the regions, for instance, of Egypt or Syria or Lebanon or the Palestinian regions of Gaza and the West Bank, where they point to Iran and Iraq or Babylon. All of these regions as the peoples in the regions and the locations that will be the primary recipients of the Messiah's judgments when He returns. And instead of simply identifying them according to the names that the Scriptures give them, we go, well, these are just allegorical passages that refer to any real bad guy, any guy that's against Israel or against God, and we allegorize them into oblivion, and we commit the exact precise hermeneutical error that we fault those that do the same thing with Israel for. We become replacement theologians. Now, in my new book, The Mideast Beast, the scriptural case for an Islamic Antichrist, I walk the student of prophecy, the careful student of Scripture, through numerous prophecies throughout the prophets, looking to these many nations. I discuss the most responsible hermeneutic or method of interpretation to understand and interpret these many names in order to understand how they apply to our days, how they apply to the days to come in the day of the Lord when Jesus returns. It is essential, in light of all that's taking place in the earth today, that we pay careful attention to what the prophets have been speaking for thousands of years. If all evidences, which they appear to be, come to pass, that in fact these things which we see throughout the prophets are even now right on our horizon, it's time to sit up and begin to take very careful notice.